Hey there, Nick Genetakis here. In this video, let's focus on upgrading a Flask application from Python 2.7 to Python 3.7. And if you're watching this video way after I recorded it, and Python 3.8 or even Python 3.9 is out, then what you see in this video will work just fine. It just so happens at the time of making this video, 3.74 is the latest version of Python. And upgrading from Python 2.7 to 3.7 is a pretty important thing to do, or really any Python 3x version. And that's because 2.7 is going to be end of life starting January 1st, 2020. And right now it's August 2019. So we really only have a couple of months before Python 2.7 becomes end of life. And in this video, we're also really going to focus on doing this upgrade in a production-ready way. So I really hate when I read a book or go through a course or read a blog post where they're like, let's do it this way, but by the way, you wouldn't ever really want to do this in production because it's not safe or whatever reasons that they give you. But then they don't even tell you how to do it in production or even give you a hint on how. So you just end up with this like toy example and it feels like you wasted your time. And I am really against that. So that's actually one of the main reasons why I made a Flask course. It's basically just based on pure production code that I've run in the past. And in this video, we're actually going to go over upgrading this source code from Python 2.7 to 3.7. And actually, we're not going to have to even edit too much source code. It's mainly just upgrading Python and, going over a couple of gotchas that you might have, and also going over how you can make a code base compatible with both Python 2.7 and 3.7, just to hold you over until you decide, to really never use Python 2.7 again. And, we're going to make all of these changes in such a way where, it's pretty easy to roll back if you decide that for whatever reason, maybe some package library didn't work with 3.7 and it's like an emergency and it's not end of life yet, and you have to really go back to 2.7. So we are going to be looking at source code from my Build a SaaS App with Flask course. But even if you haven't purchased the course, then you will be able to follow along because a sample of that project is available on GitHub. And that's really what we're going to be looking at in this video. There's not going to be any slides or like any theory or blah, 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 blah. So let's just get right into it. And the first thing you'll want to do is go to this GitHub address here. NickJJ is my GitHub username. And then we'll go to the Build a SaaS App with Flask repository. And of course, I will leave links to everything I talk about in the description, so you can just click that. So we will want to start off by cloning this to somewhere on our computer. I'm using WSL in Windows here. So I'm just going to clone this to a mounted drive here. Easy peasy. Also, this code base does use Docker, and this is not an intro to Docker course, but we're really not going to get too deep in the woods with Docker, but you will need Docker installed to follow along. I really recommend going to, my website, nickgenetakis.com, and I will leave a link in the description. I have like 100 blog posts on Docker that you can read up on if you really want to, if you're starting from ground zero here without Docker experience. So with that said, let's take a look here at this source code here. So the first thing that we have to do according to this README file is we just basically need to copy this example env file to a .env file. So you can just paste that in, and then we will do a Docker Compose build. And this is going to build the image from top to bottom. Actually, you know what? So I just saw this off the corner of my eye. So we are using Python 3.74 already because not too long ago, I upgraded the default Python version for my course to be 3.74. But in this video, let's actually focus on, really doing the upgrade together. So let's go to the Docker file here, and we'll just change this Python 2.74 to, I believe, Python 2.715 is the latest version of 2.7, I believe. And we can still use Slim Buster there. This is Debian Buster as the distro. And it's the slim variant of the Docker image that is quite efficient when it comes to a file size. So with that said, now we can actually do our Docker Compose build. And what's really funny about that is that's really how easy it is to, oh wait, hold on. So I'm actually doing this unplanned, this video is unscripted. I want to go through all the troubles of doing this in real time on video so we actually get the full learning experience of what happened here. So the first error we got here, so it seems Python 2.7 Slim Buster is not actually a valid Docker image that we can use, but that's no worries. We can just go to a new tab here and then go to hub.docker.com. And then from here, we can just do a search for Python. And then we can take a look here at the official Python image, and we'll take a look at all the available tags. So you can see here, there's the one for 3.74. Let me just make this a little bit easier to see. So there's the 3.74 Slim Buster one that we were actually using. But let's take a look here to see what we have for Python 2.715. So it seems like actually 2.716 Slim Buster is the one that we want. So that's no big deal at all. Let's just go back to our code editor here. We'll just go and open up this Docker file. And then, we will change this to be 16 instead. And I am using tmux here, so I am going to take advantage of that. Let me go back to the correct directory here, and I will do my Docker Compose build in this window, just so I can switch between the code editor and building all this stuff. So I actually didn't even have 2.716 downloaded, so we can see here that Docker pulled it down for us. And now it's basically going through this entire Docker file from top to bottom. Eventually it's going to get to the point where it runs the gUnicorn web server, which is the web server of choice that I use in the Flask course, even in development, because I'm a big fan of using the same things that I use in development in production. So let's take a look here and see how this is going. So this actually will take probably about a minute or so to build from top to finish, or top to bottom. Oh, okay, so PyTest 5.1. So yeah, this is actually going to be a more difficult upgrade path than I thought, because hey, that's the way it goes in real life. And the reason here is PyTest 5.1 is only compatible with Python 3. It's not compatible with Python 2.7. So if you're already using 2.7 in PyTest, you're probably using a much earlier version of PyTest. So let's check out what we can do here to fix that. So I would go to PyPy and then do a search for PyTest, which I actually have in my history there. And we can see the latest version is 5.11. That's fine, but we need to really figure out, how do we use PyTest with Python 2.7? And I believe I remember a while back I was reading this. Anyway, for more details here, right? If you were to upgrade or read the changelog for PyTest 5.00, they do give you a little guide here, what do you do if you're on Python 2.7? So now let's take a look here, and it says, okay, we need to use PyTest 4.6, and that will have support for Python 2.7. So really, a lot of the annoying details of upgrading between these Python versions will be fiddling around with different library package versions that we need. So let's go back to the PyTest, the PyPy page here for PyTest, and just take a look at, what type of versions they have for 4.6. What's the latest 4x or 4.6x release? And it looks like it's 4.6.5. So let's actually go back to our code editor here, and then we'll go to requirements.txt here. We will find PyTest here, and we will just replace the 5.10 with 4.6. Geez, it's hard to actually narrate this on video and remember what values are. Okay, 4.6.5. Cool. So we'll change that to 4.6.5. And I know we're probably also going to get an error with celery, maybe, because I remember that being an issue upgrading. But maybe that's actually compatible with both 2.7 and 3.7, and we'll be lucky. So I'm just going to review these requirements.txt files really quick. And this isn't the full set of package libraries that we use in the course. The open source version of the course is a very small fraction of everything that's included in the course. But, this video is not a sales pitch on the course. I just want to let you know, and actually, what? We will look at the full requirements.txt from the main course once we get to the end of the video and we successfully have upgraded our versions. So now it looks like, things are being installed, they're not blowing up immediately. So right now it's blowing through our requirements.txt file, and pip is installing all of this stuff inside of a Docker image. And now it's removing some extra cruft. And if I go back to the Docker file, whoops, it's hard. I'm not like a touch typist. I'm very much like, I have to look at certain keys and I type like a maniac. But that cleanup thing was basically this from the Docker file. So let's see where we're at. So great. So actually things have built successfully. And now we can just do a Docker compose up. And hopefully things will work. It might not actually work because I was running 3.7 before. So maybe I need to do some stuff, but let's see. So actually it looks pretty good. So now let me go to localhost port 8000. Yeah, I'm just going to end up blurring out my history instead of trying to tiptoe around that. So here we go. So here is, the very, 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 very slimmed down version of the application we build in the course. Right now, it basically just has a contact form, but we add users and Stripe and monthly payments, one-off payments, like custom admin dashboard and all that fun stuff. But the application right now is running in Python 2.716, and we can hopefully verify that. So if I go down here and let me just open up another window here and go back to this one directory here, and we will do a docker compose exec web, run the snake eyes binary here. I'm trying to sort of skip ahead, there's a CLI component to this application, and we can run some test suite. So I just want to make sure that this test suite actually fully passes. And this failure is actually totally expected. It's because in my .env file, I do not have my correct Gmail authentication for my Gmail account there. So the test is trying to actually send an email out using invalid credentials. So that one failure, I am totally cool at that. That is not related. And we can see here, it's like authentication required. There's an error, just authenticating to Gmail. No worries there. Everything else is good to go. There's actually not too many tests in this version of the code base because there's really not that much to test. So cool, we have our Python 2.7 version running. Now let's go over how do we upgrade this, right? And with Docker, and this really goes back to doing it in a production ready way. And wow, I just looked down at the time. We're already at 12.5 minutes and we still have quite a lot to go. But one interesting thing about using Docker is, and upgrading in a production ready way is let's say that we weren't using Docker and we had this application deployed to wherever, DigitalOcean, AWS, it doesn't really matter, some self-managed VPS that we have root access to and can install whatever we want. So it's well, what would you probably do? You probably have, Python, I don't know, whatever. Let's just say you have Python 2.7 installed, in a virtual environment. All of your package dependencies are probably in that virtual environment. And if you wanted to upgrade to Python 3.7, then it's you'd have to make a new virtual environment, install all your other packages. I hope that you're using a virtual environment because otherwise it will be a nightmare to upgrade. But with Docker, it's pretty easy. We just basically change the first line to be 3.74 because that's the version that we want to upgrade to. If 3.78 or something like that is out now, feel free to update to that. And you can find that out by going to the Docker Hub and then go to the Python image and you can see all the latest tags there. So that's the only change that we need to make there. But we also do have that requirements.txt file where, now that we're using Python 3.7, we do want to upgrade this to, the latest version of PyTest that's compatible with Python 3.7. And let's go ahead and rebuild this because we do need to rebuild everything now. So the way, and I'll go over this in 1 second. So I'm just running docker compose build again. And the reason why we do need to rebuild everything is because we just changed this requirements.txt file. And we also changed this Docker file. And since we changed the very top of this Docker file, Docker is basically going to go over all of these lines again as if it's a fresh, brand new installation. So, Docker is smart enough to cache things when it can. So if you didn't touch this file and you just edited this line or something, then just from this line and below would get rebuilt. It wouldn't do everything above it. But yeah, so now we can see we're rerunning the pip install for all of those packages, but now we're using the latest versions, which is pretty cool. Hopefully once this finishes building, then things will work pretty much right off the bat. But there are some interesting things here that I guess I really can't show on video because user authentication isn't in this version of the code base, but we'll look at that in a second. But now let's try to do a Docker Compose up here just to see as a sanity check if things are actually working. Okay, so far so good. Okay, that blew up. So what actually blew up here? Celery beat schedule, blah, 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 DB type cannot be determined. Yeah, so I'm reading that right from here, by the way. So this is a pretty common error. So when you upgrade from Python 2.7 to 3.7 and you happen to be using Celery, so what Celery does is it will create this one file called a Celery beat schedule. And it's totally safe to delete it. So you can just delete that file and then rerun your Docker Compose up. And now it should work. Let's see. You ready to mingle Celery? Let me know. Cool, it's mingling. Mingle complete. So now let's try going back to our page here and reload it. Ooh, we did get the object of typesbyte is not JSON serializable. Great. So this is a really interesting one. And this has to do with saving sessions to a cookie. And I thought we weren't going to get to see this one because user authentication wasn't set up, but it seems to be a little bit more low level than user authentication. We can see here in the stack trace that it's actually related to the WT forms package or Flask WTF. In either case, basically what happens here is if we go back to, well, we can't go back anywhere because we have this error, but the idea is when we rendered that contact form, actually we can at least go to the home page here. Oh, haha, just kidding, we can't. So the reason is CSRF token is generated and it's been encoded in a certain way using Python 2.7, but 3.7, Python 3.7, it is now like, I think it's like a string bytes or something like that instead of Unicode. I don't know the exact full details on that one, but the fix is pretty easy and there's multiple ways you can fix this, but the way I recommend fixing this, basically what it boils down to is we need to delete our cookie. But I mean, if you're running in production, you can't just be like, oh, by the way, you know, like if a customer emails you and they're like, hey, what the hell, we're getting this error here. Like imagine just telling your customer like, just open up DevTools, man, and go to application and then delete all the things there. Like, duh, why can't you fix that yourself? Like that's not going to fly really. So let's do this in a production ready way, which is actually pretty painless. So all we have to do is kill our server. I Control C there. And what we can do is we can open up some nerd tree action here because I need to open up a get ignored file, that .env file. That's why we have the example file, because the real one is not supposed to be in version control because it'll have, you know, super private things like Stripe API keys, email credentials, and everything else that you'd want to hide. But what it comes down to, and you can see here, like my email username and password is not filled out, which is why we got that Gmail authentication error. But normally this is where I would actually put my Gmail credentials, but you know, I'm doing a video on YouTube and probably leaking those out to the public wouldn't be a good idea. And like my passwords are already crazy long and super cool and like inside a password manager, and I just didn't feel like updating it to a new one. But the real thing that we really want to pay attention to in this file is the secret key. And this is related to Flask. So what happens here, at least at a super very high level, is, you know, whatever value that we put here, which usually would be like a random string of, you know, 32 or 64 characters, is this value gets used to assign sessions. And if you change this value, let's say we just change this to ABC123, this is a surefire way to invalidate all sessions for everybody. So it's basically, it's pretty much equivalent to like just deleting your cookie in the browser without the user actually having to go in there and do it. So, you know, make sure you change that secret key to be something to whatever, you know, something different to what it was before. And then all we need to do is do a Docker Compose up. And this will take a couple of seconds here. Notice how much faster things start once Docker has built everything. And now if we reload the page, fingers crossed, wow, that's also like the most massive zoom in ever. Here we go. So like the page is back to working. We got rid of that error simply by invalidating this value here for the secret key. And I guess that's pretty much it when it comes to, you know, things to look out for when you're upgrading from Python 2.7 to 3.7. But now let's actually look at a more complete version of this code base just to go over some other packages that might give you trouble. And also actually before we get into that, It is worth mentioning, like, another benefit of using Docker here is like, let's say that you push this, to production, you ran your tests and all that other stuff and everything passed and you're cool and, you put it up there, but for whatever reason, 2 days later, something happens and, upgrading to Python 3.7 is no good. And you have to revert back to 2.7 because, yeah, like things are just not working, like some library incompatibility, like an edge case happens or something like that. What's really nice about using Docker is you saw before, like we just go to the Docker file and we just change that to be 2.7.16. And then we also go to the requirements.txt file. We downgrade any packages that we need to downgrade. You rebuild the image and then you push it to production, or really probably you would push it over to like the Docker Hub and then pull it down in production. But I mean, like that's how easy it is to switch between, whatever versions of whatever runtime that you want. I know this is like more mainly focused on Flask, but the same concept applies to Node or Elixir or Ruby or PHP, like, whatever you want to upgrade to. It's pretty nice. So that pretty much wraps up this. Let's actually kill this server, and now I'm going to go to the super secret closed source version of the application because I do want to show build a SaaS app. What? D courses, build a SaaS app with Flask. D course, oh, my bad, sorry about that. It's D source courses. So you won't be able to follow along with this, but we will be looking at a more complete list of packages. And we're also going to look at another concept that I didn't really mention before, which is like, how do you code your application in such a way so it can work with Python 2.7 and 3.7 at the same time? So you can upgrade and downgrade between Python versions. This is really good in cases like right now. So it's like, we're still about 5 months or 4 months away from Python 2.7 being end of life. But I mean, this Snake Eyes, which is the main application we've built, it's been compatible with Python 2.7 and 3x for quite some time now, like over a year. So doing this compatibility thing where you make it work with both versions could definitely be something you'll want to do just to tidy over until eventually you drop 2.7 support. But with that said, I'm going to go into the full version of the code base, and I'm also going to build it with no cache just to make sure that Docker does a complete top to bottom change here and rebuild everything from scratch, because the dependencies and everything is much different now. So let me close that, and then we'll go back to I guess one more directory, courses, build a SaaS app with Flask. You won't be able to follow along here, but I will open this up in Vim just so we can take a look, like this Docker file from, the main course, the paid version of the course, which I will leave a link to in the description, whatever, this Docker file that we're looking at, it is the same exact Docker file from the open source version. So, I mean, in this case, it defaults to 3.74 because now the main course also defaults to Python 3.7. But one interesting thing to look at here is like requirements.txt. And the only reason I'm showing this is because I wanted to just show off what packages are compatible with Python 3.7, because, this is a fairly decently sized Flask application. And, these packages are pretty popular out in the wild. So at least by looking at this, you'll be able to see all the packages that are compatible. Now, one thing to note is when it comes to using Celery and Python 3.7, I believe Celery 4.3 was the first version of Celery that is actually compatible with Python 3.7. So one thing that prevented me from upgrading the code base to default to Python 3.7 for a long time was just waiting on Celery to update to a version that worked. Maybe some later 4.2x version possibly have worked, but in either case, 4.3 works. But you can see here we're using the latest version of Flask as of today, which is like the end of August 2019. Unicorn, all of these packages are basically updated. It looks like PyTest, I'm using 5.10, even though 5.11 came out. I guess the 1.1 just came out the other day because I literally made an update video like maybe not even a week ago. But yeah, in either case, like that's such a super minor change that both of them are fine with Python 3.7. But we're using PyTest Cov to do some test coverage, some mocking, some Flake 8. PsychoPG2 is for interacting with the Postgres database, because The open source version of Snake Eyes doesn't use Postgres, but the full version does. Like we're using SQL Alchemy, Flask SQL Alchemy. All of these work. There's Redis and Celery. We're using Celery for a number of things. Basically, yeah. I get into all the specifics in the course. And then also like we're using Flask WTF because we're dealing with a lot of forms, custom admin forms, user registration, creating coupon codes for Stripe, like all that great stuff. And like speaking of Stripe, like they have an official Python library. We're using that, latest version of Faker, and then a couple other extensions like debug toolbar, mail, login limiter, which we do some rate limiting for. So in the Snake Eyes application, actually, let's see if this thing finished building. I can just show you really quick, like the application. But, there's actually a demo video on the course description page that you can look at. But, we have some tasks here that get run through Celery, like deleting coupons and users and marking old credit cards. Like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in this application. Actually, there's really nothing much to look at here. Like the limiter, I was just going to say, like, the game itself, we actually build, let's see if this actually immediately works. Okay, so I'm just going to log in as dev at localhost, whatever. Again, you can't really follow along with this. But yeah, so like the rate limiter. So the TLDR on this game basically is you get to guess like what number you think the dice is going to roll. And then you can wager some amount of coins that you have. And you buy these coins basically by using Stripe. So it's like, $1 will get you 100 coins or, whatever pricing you feel like setting up. But it's like you place a bet here and it's like, oh, you lost, try again, because I guessed a 6 and it actually rolled an 8. And we can see here on the recent bets. But if I spam the heck out of this thing, you can see here, it's like you've been temporarily rate limited. And that's thanks to the rate limit package that was in the requirements.txt file. So you wouldn't want like a bot to come in here and just try to bet like as fast as their network connection is. So, there's all little things like that in the course. But anyways, let me scroll up real slow in this file, just so you can see all the packages that are compatible with Python 3.7. And most of these are compatible with Python 2.7 as well. The only exception there was really PyTest needed to be downgraded to, 4.65. And I believe all the other ones will be completely good to go as is. Now let's take a look at some ways we can make our codebase compatible with Python 2.7 and 3.7 at the same time. And for that, I am going to do a search here on my codebase for the word except, because I do have a try except somewhere that shows an example of how to do this. I just need to find it here in the list because I actually forgot exactly where it is. I think it is this one here. Yes, exactly. So at the very top of this file, we're doing some pretty standard Python-y things here where we're importing the URL parse module, and then we're importing this function called URL join. And the only difference here between doing this normally, like without the try except, is this will actually work for both Python 2.7 and 3.7. So the basic idea is it's going to try to import from URL parse, which is compatible with Python 2.7. But if this happens to blow up because it doesn't exist in Python 3.7 and it blows up due to an import error, then it's going to try and import urllib.parse and then the URL join function. And then we can see down here we're using the function in the same exact way for both versions of Python. So really the only difference here is the namespace of the module that we're importing this function from is different between both versions of Python, but this is one way to make it compatible for both versions. And there are a couple of libraries that you need to look out for. And if you do a quick Google search for Python, module imports for 2.7 versus 3.7, you'll find a whole list. But yeah, that's really mostly what I do in my code base. I don't really have too many super specific Python 3x features in the code base itself. I'm not using async await and stuff like that. But now that Python 2.7 is going to be end of life pretty soon, maybe I will start using those features when they apply. So they don't really apply anywhere in this application, but I have done a couple of Flask contracts recently where I am using some Python 3x features, and it's pretty cool. F-strings is a very big one. You can Google that if you want to read up on that, because it goes a little off topic for this video, but F-strings are very nice in Python 3.x. So that's really going to wrap up this video. That's almost a 30-minute video. Just basically a heads up on how you can upgrade a Flask application. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please drop in a comment below. What are some of your strategies for upgrading between versions of Python? And yeah, thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next video.